Who out of all of DBD's licensed killers is the best adaptation? Today I want to look at just that. I'll be judging each of the licensed killers based on how faithfully they translate from their source material into DBD, but also how effectively they're adapted. Adaptations requiring a compromise sometimes without losing the feel of the character. I'll look at their visuals, perks, and lore to determine this. We have 4 tiers, which we'll place the killers into as we go. First up, Myers. Michael Myers, or The Shape in DBD, was the game's first licensed adaptation, coming to the game on the 25th of October 2016. This was a really big deal for DBD at the time and laid the foundation for its many licenses to come. It was a great precedent to set too, as Myers in my opinion is pretty near perfect as adaptations go, sometimes to his own detriment. The core inspiration for the Myers we have in game is the original Halloween from 1978. Looking at Myers visually, the two are admittedly a bit different. Our version is a bit bulkier, taller, broader shoulders. I like this change though, and I think despite it looking different from Halloween's depiction, this is fine. This Myers fits DBD well and definitely feels more supernatural and imposing. Power-wise, they basically nailed him too. He's got a stalking-based power that references his actions in the 1978 film, with it slowly building strength over time until he's able to insta-down and go on a spree. The power is really faithful, which has at times led Myers to being quite weak due to this restricting him from evolving with the game's faster speed nowadays. Luckily Myers can sort of keep up with use of his add-ons though. Perk-wise they also did a great job, not only giving us 3 unique and interesting perks, but also introducing the new obsession mechanic. Myers was a home run for a first license. To me, he is a perfect adaptation. Quite the start. Bubba. Bubba Sawyer, or The Cannibal, was the next release for DBD, coming out on the 14th of September 2017. Bubba got much more mixed reviews, and this was largely down to him seeming rushed. When he was released, he had a very simple power. It was comprised of just a sweeping chainsaw. It had no charges or anything like that yet, and he didn't even get unique add-ons. He instead stole Billy's. This left a sour taste for many, but with time, Bubba I'd say did eventually find his footing, ending up with how he is today, with a more developed power and his own lore-fitting add-ons. Visually they did a similar thing with Bubba as they did with Myers, making him bulkier and a bit more tall and imposing, but it works well, and I think it even looks better than the TCM game version, which is saying a lot. His perks also feel pretty solid and lore-fitting, making key references to moments from the film, such as Franklin's death and the suspicious chili. Due to his issues, I think Bubba was a good adaptation. Freddy. Freddy Krueger, or the Nightmare as he's rather dramatically called in DBD, was the 3rd licensed killer to join the roster, and did so just a month after Bubba on the 26th of October 2017. Freddy has always been the problem child of licensed killers, having a wild ride over the years of different versions, and being initially disliked as he was the 2010 remake version and not the original Freddy. He was also awfully weak upon release, but quite lore accurate. Then he became ridiculously strong, but strayed far from his lore. Then he was sort of weak and boring, and nowadays he's a bit lore accurate and a bit fun. It's a strange trajectory he's had, and one which does speak to the difficulty of adapting a character like this. A dream demon who has almost complete control over his victims' minds. Despite his slightly messy power over the years though, there's always been great strengths and just cool features to his power. The dream world, for example, is a great visual spectacle that just really encapsulates his vibe so well, paired up with the lullaby, and it's just great. Visually I think he looks pretty good too. That's Freddy. He is a killer I think that does suffer a bit due to his lack of voice lines. They could really elevate him. There is something about him that feels a bit lame at the moment. Despite his great power and presence as a dream demon, he does feel quite weak and lacking that control you'd expect from the character. The perks make nice references and do represent him well though, I'd say. Freddy is a decent adaptation. Pig. Amanda Young, or the Pig, brought in a slightly more modern style of killer, with her coming from the license Saw. Her DBD lore making reference to Saw 1 to 3, making her the first, I believe, to take inspiration from more than one film. She released on the 23rd of January 2018. Saw is a curious license to adapt because the main antagonist, of course, is John Kramer, Jigsaw. He's very sick throughout the series though, and so Amanda was the pick instead, a disciple of Jigsaw and a character with her own streak of violence that separated her. This was a good choice with her or Hoffman being the clear picks. The power is something that's always impressed me. Implementing the reverse bear traps as the core was a sort of revolutionary mechanic for DBD at the time, introducing a secondary objective. It also related to Amanda, but adapted it for her and the trials. She further got stealth and an ambush attack where she growls like a lion, with her taking on the sound effects of the Saw series. It is a bit goofy, but I've always loved that too. It's a cool way to adapt that in. They also managed to really seamlessly fit her in with the DBD lore, making Amanda believe in her own delusion that this is what Jigsaw wanted for her, and now making her very loyal to the entity. Despite the simplicity of her appearance, it does look horrific. The pig head really gets me. I actually found it to be one of the scariest killers when I first started playing in 2019, and from not knowing who she was at the time, I was really disgusted and put off by her appearance. Her perks make solid references too, with the only problematic one being Hangman's Trick. That's definitely a bit of a miss for me, and its inconsistent changes over the years haven't helped this. Amanda is a great adaptation. Ghostface. Ghostface, or Danny Johnson, or Jed Olsen, depending on the day and city, was a unique instance for DBD, with him being a half-licensed, half-original killer. The license for Ghostface is actually just for the mask, where the lore, visuals, and perks are all behavior originals, to my understanding. He released on the 18th of June 2019, and just might be the best Ghostface there's ever been. If we're being literal, from the source material, which in this case is a mask, yeah, they nailed the mask. That's a perfect adaptation. But this depiction really went above and beyond simply adapting a mask well. Ghosty is impressive due to how they crafted such a well-loved character just from that mask. They not only created something new, but also respectfully made reference to other Ghostface depictions, most famously the Scream one, with small nods toward it, such as the weapon wipe. Danny is a great balance of serious and comical. He's much more tactical and meticulous, but he also has a silly streak which is shown through his laughing in the lobby and fan favorite Mori. Even his perks, despite there being very little basis to go on, represent him and his lore well as a meticulous killer who is now highly loyal and fascinated by the entity. All of his add-ons only strengthen his story too. His gameplay of course is also amazing because it nails stealth. It's the stealthiest stealth gameplay in the game and feels very immersive with his ability to crouch and lean, giving him unique movement for a killer. Ghostface is a perfect adaptation. Demogorgon. Demogorgon, or well, the Demogorgon, is a character that sort of broke DBD at the time. This was a huge deal, a modern horror license coming to the game with none other than Stranger Things. Demo released on the 17th of November 2019. I would say at the time too, Demo was pretty perfect, the first non-human killer for one, and incredibly well detailed and animated despite this. I do think it's a killer that with retrospect I do wish could have had more done with it. Seeing Xeno's tunnels nowadays makes me lament the idea of Demo getting them somewhat. This and the ability to walk on all fours. It's hard to hate Demo Dog though, and the power does still feel like a Demogorgon's. Demo's also very visually faithful. Its gameplay does feel inhuman, with Demo's noises and growls adding to this. Along with its long-range shred attack, you really feel the power and weight behind its movements. The perks are solid too, although they do focus a lot on the supernatural and distortion side of things, which seems more in line with Stranger Things Vecna over Demo, I would say. I like it regardless though. Demo is a good adaptation. This is largely with retrospect now though, but I guess that is sort of how we're ranking them, in the same way we did with Bubba. We need to take in the full perspective, I think. Pyramid Head. Pyramid Head, or the Executioner. The Silent Hill chapter marked the first licensed killer to come to DBD from another game. Pyramid Head released on the 16th of June 2020. Wow, what a release too, and one of the most visually faithful, detailed, and lovingly made chapters as a whole. Pyramid Head looks incredible, and perfect, honestly. I would say they translated this hulking mass across pretty well too. Playing as him, you really get a feel for the weight of his blade and the rhythm of his movement. I also think the abilities they came up with were great inventions and fit him well, incorporating the torment mechanic and the completely new ability to cage. The only clunky part I have to say is the ranged attack. Especially with its slight jankiness over the years, I can't help but critique it slightly. His perks are appropriate and character-fitting, his lore is interesting, and a unique means of a character directly establishing a connection with the entity. This was a tall order for sure, but for me, despite nearly being perfection, he's a great adaptation. Nemesis. Nemesis, or the Nemesis, or Nemesis Alpha, I suppose, or Nemesis T-Type, released on the 15th of June 2021, and was the second game installment for DBD's licensed killers. To kick off, Nemesis looks great, perfectly depicting his model from its slightly divisive source, Resident Evil 3 Remake. The only issue with his visuals is that he's a bit too small, but he has to be. The lore is simple but works in line with his and Jill's stories, and his perks are fitting and genuinely unique and strong in their own ways. Can you tell I'm building up to something though? Whilst I love the depiction of Nemesis in DBD, I can't help but feel he's a bit off gameplay wise. My way to show this has always been to say he looks like Nemesis, but he doesn't feel like Nemesis. Whilst there's an incredible weight to you as you run, a power behind your brutal fist attack, a presence as you use a single kick on a generator, the tentacle whip just doesn't quite work, I think, as the core power. Where in RE3, the tentacle is more of a grappling tool, an attack with a longer range, used in attempts to restrain Jill. There's something really floppy and off feeling for Nemi's DBD tentacle. It feels too short and kind of pathetic in comparison. That's really my only criticism, as the rest of the power, with the T-virus infection and the zombies, are perfection. But this is a really core element, I think, the feel of the character as you play them. So regrettably, despite him being one of my favourite killers to play still, I think he's just a decent adaptation, largely for the feel. Pinhead. Pinhead, or the Cenobite, or the Hell Priest, as I wish he would have been called, released on the 7th of September 2021. This was one of the game's biggest shockers, as the Hellraiser chapter was one many had never even considered really, as Pinhead's abilities and the style of those films was so different to anything we'd seen in DBD before, but they really nailed it. Pinhead is visually perfect, his animations look awesome, he's voiced by Doug Bradley, and despite the oddities of his power, it fits him really well. I can't quite find a flaw in his DBD depiction. The perks are also spot on and all amazing, which helps. His presence in game matches the majesty and aura simply of Pinhead in the original Hellraiser. His unique abilities of pairing up a chain shot anti-loop attack with a secondary objective of solving the box is really clever. If I did have an issue with Pinhead, it could just be the fact that he's been a little unhealthy for the game here and there, but I'm not sure if this is a point against his accuracy really. For a character so initially ill-fitting, he fits so well. Seeing as I can't really find a flaw, it'll have to be a perfect adaptation. Sadako. Sadako Yamamura, or the Onryō, was released on the 8th of March 2022 to a very warm reception, and largely due to her jump scares. A key thing people loved about Sadako's adaptation for the fog was the horror she brought with her. The fact she jump scared you in the lobby and creepily emerged from the well when selected. Sadako really leveled up the lobby animation game. Another thing I love about Sadako is actually her lore, which I've not touched on too much for a lot of characters, but that's because there largely isn't much to touch on. Sadako's is really cool though, revealing how the entity approaches a powerful supernatural force like herself and forms a symbolic bond. Sadako does suffer a bit though by being hard to adapt. Her power is quite passive after all, aside when she directly kills, a tape that takes 7 days to enact. This being translated to 7 bars of a condemned meter. It's a novel concept and I think it can work well one day, but it's had a tough time over the years. It's been reworked a bunch of times, bounced between OP to horribly weak, and there never quite seems to be a good middle ground. It's a shame, but it does detract from her feel and power. Whilst there are very immersive moments when you crawl out of the TVs or appear suddenly beside a survivor, there's also a lot of spamming teleports, failing to be particularly stealthy, and a lacking feeling of immersion. Despite these flaws though, her other elements are just too good to drop her too low. Sadako is a good adaptation. Wesker, Albert Wesker, or the Mastermind as he's so boldly called, was released on the 30th of August 2022. Wesker established a new vibe for the game with his release, and a precedent of chapters getting sequels. Despite my reservations about hearing he would be added, originally through leaks about a year before, I was pleasantly surprised how well he worked. It is largely down to DBD's shifting vibe and gameplay though. If you'd added Wesker back in 2016 or 2017, the vibe wouldn't be right. But with the shifting times, faster pace of the game, and generally brighter look of DBD, it did fit very well. Wesker looks like Wesker, spot on from head to toe. That's Wesker. And when he speaks, That's Wesker. 7 minutes is all I can spare to play with you. Goofy, but it's Wesker. His power, his bounds are also incredible, not only as a fair representation of his Ouroboros, but also speed and agility, but further in gameplay as a mechanic. It's incredibly sound and has been seen as one of the most well-made killers in the game's history, despite being licensed, which you think would restrict it more. Fun for both sides, whilst also feeling like Wesker. His perks all feature him trying to look cool, and have names fitting his gigantic ego. The one thing I'm not big on with him is his add-ons. I'm not such a fan of how they're more RPD related or RE2 related even, despite him not being the one to do these puzzles in game or interact with a lot of it. That's a nitpick though for sure. Wesker is undoubtedly a perfect adaptation. Xenomorph. Xenomorph, or Alien, or the Xenomorph, was our second non-human licensed killer and released on the 29th of August 2023. To an initially positive reception, but a quickly depleting one, I remember. Xeno was super flashy when it came out, incredible animations, pristine visuals, and awesome new power elements like its tunnels and the placeable flame turrets. It felt quite innovative in that way. I have to say though, despite all this flash, I've always felt the power has not quite represented Xeno that well, and I know this is a very contested point. Half the people I speak to think that Xeno's a perfect adaptation, and the other half think it's pretty bad. So I respect the people who view this as an amazing adaptation, but I also respectfully disagree, I think. I also don't think it's awful or anything though. We're mostly talking power-wise here too, by the way. Visuals, sounds, animations, it is perfect, categorically I'd almost say. But gameplay-wise, it doesn't feel like Xeno in my opinion, which as I mentioned before is a really key factor for these adaptations. Whilst it does get elements right like the tunnels, it gets a lot wrong too, I think, with the focus on the turrets and its flame vulnerability. It's cool that it goes on all fours, but it lacks stealth. I feel there's lots of good directions, but it just misses. I would love if Xeno had a much more tactical power, something that speaks to its intelligence and cunning, also its stealth and planning, and potentially even its goal of spreading its species. I feel a bit strange crawling around as Xeno, with the focus being largely on the tail attack, which can feel a bit cumbersome at times and not like the precise ultimate weapon I feel I should be. Aside this, nicely done perks, solid lore, and overall I think a good adaptation. Chucky. Chucky, or Charles Lee Ray, or The Good Guy, was a fascinating addition to the game, with him seeming impossible to add originally due to his size. How do you add such a tiny man? Well, it happened on the 28th of November 2023. I like the compromise they made for Chucky. They took on the challenge but also broke a few rules to make him work. He's third person for one, but also when he hooks, he gets help from his ghostly human self. They're really clever ways of making a character like this work without completely changing DBD's gameplay. He felt like a fresh perspective on the game at the time. Visually, he's amazing, his voice lines are incredibly well recorded by original actor Brad Dourif, and yeah, that's Chucky. The only questionable part I would say is the Chucky ghost looks a bit iffy. I think the weakness of this adaptation comes in the form of his power. Chucky doesn't really have a power necessarily in the films. His power is the fact he's a doll, which gives him an advantage. But despite this, they made it work, as this is well translated into his power with his scamper ability, his partial stealth, and his dash attack. It's a bit of a hectic pairing of abilities, but it works and represents him well. Playing as him does feel like Chucky too. You feel like an annoying little yapping, egotistical, murderous dark magic doll. Cool perks, solid incorporation with his lore too, with there being a more substantial story compared to most. Chucky is a great adaptation. Vecna. Vecna, or the Whispered One, Lord of the Rotted Tower, the Master of Secrets, or the Lich, was a curveball character coming from the D&D universe and releasing on the 3rd of June 2024. It's an odd adaptation because of the freedom of D&D, but this seems to have been embraced in this case, with the lore centering around Vecna's exposure to the DBD universe and how he reacted to it with fascination. This is some of the best licensed lore we've had, with Vecna being a perfect vessel for exploring things like translating the entity's language. Visually, Vecna looks perfect, he's VA'd by Matthew Mercer incredibly, and has a series of flashy animations. Power-wise, Vecna is difficult to adapt, and he's the greatest case, I think, of an adaptation needing to take into account a huge shift in power level. This was addressed with the Mark of the Entity, or Mark of Negation, which is a nice way to provide an answer for those questions. His power is really unique, having a dial of spells to pick from in true D&D fashion. Each provides a unique effect, with each ability forming together for a complete power. He also came with new chests and magical items to spice up gameplay. I think this is so flawlessly done, and I really can't find an issue with this adaptation. Even the perks and add-ons are fitting and appropriate. I think this is a plain and simple, home run, perfect adaptation. Dracula or Vlad the Impaler or the Dark Lord was added on the 27th of August 2024, a long-awaited vampire addition to the killer roster, and a very well done one too. Another license that seems initially intimidating due to it coming from an animation, yet it manages to translate Dracula's visuals very well. Dracula's aura and status feels intact and faithful with his visuals and voice lines. A hugely cool thing too is his castle, which follows him around the realm and shows off his power too. The entity allowed him to keep a whole castle. Pretty cool. Power-wise, he has switchable forms, able to go from vampire to wolf to bat, all of which have their own unique strengths. The only one I'm not so convinced by is the vampire form, with its pillar of fire attack. It feels a bit passive, where I feel like it could be more aggressive in its casting, sort of like his lore imagery. But I suppose in the realm Dracula is so far above the power level of the survivors, it does sort of work. It needs to be considered that it's a fair adaptation, even if the dynamics are changed slightly. Perk-wise, I think it's pretty great. Lore is really solid and a nice recounting of his story, and overall really impressive. Dracula is a great adaptation. Kaneki Ken, or the Ghoul, is a pretty great adaptation in all honesty, and translates the visual style of Tokyo Ghoul over to DBD very well, with his Kagune in particular having a really nice texture. Kaneki is well presented as a half ghoul, with DBD bringing him to the game during his moment of greatest suffering and seemingly held perpetually in a lust for hunger. This is a smart way to make an atypical character a killer of the realm. Great perks, awesome add-on choice. His power too is really faithful and once again a good compromise from what would otherwise be a very overpowered character. Being able to bound about at such a speed, feed on the survivors directly, and have an enraged or empowered mode is a smart way to go about introducing a ghoul to the game. And wow, did they really make you manage to feel the power behind his enraged mode. When you go into that enraged mode, you can really feel the power behind him, which I love. It's just... There's a number of nice small details too, like Kaneki's finger clicking and screams of agony. There's some really minimal nitpicks I have with Kaneki. His outfit, for example, is more his later post-Jason look, and so it feels slightly misaligned. Other than that though, I think Kaneki's a perfect adaptation. Springtrap. William Afton Springtrap, or the Animatronic, as he's known in DBD, was released on the 17th of June 2025, to the biggest player peak in the game's history. This release was a huge deal, but I'm a little 50-50 on how well adapted he is though. But I do believe this is partly down to a similar theme to other adaptations of there not being clear powers necessarily to draw from. I think going a full stealth route, for example, with Springtrap wouldn't quite work, but I also don't know if the axe mechanic is super fitting either. From what I understand too, it actually originates from fans, which is quite cool on one hand, but also a bit confusing on another, as there's no presence of Springtrap with an axe in the games. I feel like I'm being super negative, I just find it a bit confusing why this has so much focus. It is a functional power in-game though. The implementation of the security doors is a much clearer connection, and really well done I think. Insane how they managed to incorporate this into a gameplay mechanic. Visually, Springtrap is incredible, and if I can be so bold to say, the best visualization of him the series has seen. His voice lines are great too, his janky animations are perfect, and his lore blends him into the DBD world pretty well. I think he's a huge success, with my one drawback from perfection being the questionable power, I find, which I feel does affect the feel of the character somewhat when playing as him. Springtrap otherwise is a great adaptation. Well, that's gonna do it. Here's our final list, and hopefully question answered, of who the best adapted licensed killers are. Let me know your thoughts as always down below. Thanks for watching, and goodbye.